Please note, this episode is best experienced with headphones. The experiences and content shared in this podcast are personal and subjective, and informed by research. They are not presented as proof, only as reflective moments in time. Paranormal experiences, encounters, beliefs, and real-life events affect people in different ways, and all perspectives are valid. When we explore true crime, we do so to reflect on the human experience of suffering, not to sensationalize it. As always, I ask you to listen with an open mind. You are listening to the Beyond Haunted UK podcast. Thank you for listening and for following our stories into the paranormal, true crime, and the unexplained. My name's Jamie. Now let's begin. Tonight's episode is a difficult one. Not because of graphic detail, because I don't really want to dwell on that, but because of what the story represents. This isn't about notoriety. It's about harm, about loss, and about the way violence leaves marks that do not fade when attention moves on. The Moors murders remain one of the most painful chapters in modern British history. Not because they were unique in cruelty, but because of how ordinary the world around them appeared at the time they occurred. Britain in the early 1960s was a society in transition. Post-war communities were still shaped by close neighbourhoods, routine, and a general expectation of trust. Children often moved freely between homes, shops, and streets. The idea of stranger danger had not yet become part of everyday thinking. Police procedures, missing persons responses, and safeguarding systems were far less developed than they are today. A missing child was not always treated with immediate urgency. It was not uncommon for authorities to assume a child had run away or would return home on their own. This context matters. Not as an excuse, but as a reminder of how differently the world was structured and how harm was able to move within those gaps. Between 1963 and 1965, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady carried out a series of murders of children and young people. The victims were Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. Each child was taken from everyday life, from streets, bus stops, neighbourhood spaces that should have been safe. The methods varied, but manipulation and trust played a central role. Some victims were offered simple assistance or companionship. Some were lured with small promises, and some were taken into spaces that felt familiar before becoming dangerous. The moorland outside Manchester became one of the locations where victims were taken. Remote ground, exposed, and a place where voices disappear into the wind and distance. The crimes were not immediately connected. The patterns emerged more slowly, and missing children were not always linked. Families waited, and hope lingered in the absence of certainty. The case began to unravel in 1965 after Edward Evans was murdered in Brady and Hindley's home. A witness came forward. Police entered the house. What they found opened a door into a much wider reality of harm. Investigations revealed recordings, photographs, fragments of evidence that exposed the depth of what had been happening behind the closed doors. What makes this case especially difficult to hold is the premeditation involved. This was not spontaneous violence. It was planned, structured, and even rehearsed. That awareness changes how we sit with it, because it removes the comfort of imagining harm as something that happens suddenly. Here, harm was built into routine. One of the most enduring wounds of this case is that Keith Bennett was never found. His mother, Winnie Johnson, became a quiet presence in the public memory of this case. She spent decades appealing for information, walking the moors and hoping for the chance to bring her son home. She died without that closure. There is something uniquely painful about not being able to lay someone to rest. Without a body, grief has no physical place to settle. It becomes suspended, a question that never resolves. This is not just a detail of the case. It is one of the deepest legacies, because it reminds us that even when justice is pursued, some losses remain unresolved. The relationship between Hindley and Brady has been analysed endlessly. What matters here is not assigning simple motives, but recognising the dynamic that allowed harm to grow. Brady's ideology was shaped by nihilism, power, and a fascination with domination. Hindley's involvement developed within that influence, with emotional dependency, and within a shared belief system that normalised harm. Together, they reinforced one another's worst tendencies. This is a pattern seen in other cases of paired violence. When harmful beliefs are mirrored instead of challenged, they gain strength. This raises uncomfortable questions. Are people born with a capacity for this level of harm? Or does it grow through environment, influence, and reinforcement? How much of who we become is shaped by the relationships we choose or fall into? There are no easy answers here, but understanding the conditions in which harm grows is part of preventing it from repeating. The moors are still there. Open land, sky, and wind. People walk there today. They take photographs, they stand in quiet. But for many, the land carries weight. Not because the ground itself holds memory, but because we carry knowledge into the places we move through. We often speak about places feeling heavy, about rooms that feel altered, but sometimes what we sense is not something left behind by the dead. It is the awareness of what once happened there. Once you know, you cannot simply unknow. The ground does not change. The air does not change. But we do. For families, grief did not end with convictions. It stretched across decades, across anniversaries, across lives reshaped by absence. There is a responsibility in how these stories are told. Not to dwell in harm, not to centre notoriety, but to remember victims as people with lives, families, and futures that were taken. True crime carries weight, because behind every case is a real loss. If there is anything to take from this story, it is not fascination. It is attentiveness. It is care. And it is the recognition that harm often moves quietly through ordinary spaces. This episode does not offer closure, and some stories don't. It offers reflection, a pause, and a moment to acknowledge those who were lost and those who continue to live with the echo of that loss. If this episode leaves you feeling heavy, take a moment to ground yourself. Step into a different space and let the weight settle where it can. Thank you for listening to the Beyond Haunted UK podcast. If you'd like to show your support for this podcast, you can follow us on Spotify and across social media. Every follow, every share, every message helps keep these stories told with care. Wherever you are tonight, be gentle with what you carry.